Hello and welcome to an overview of Alabama's new remote notarization law. My name is Michelle Riley. This is not my first video on this topic. In fact, it's my third video. The first one I did was in May, I believe, 2020, just a few weeks after Governor Kay Ivey issued a proclamation giving us or granting notaries temporary authority to conduct notarizations remotely due to COVID-19. Months after that, our legislators decided to draft a bill that would formalize or make permanent a type of remote notarization that was passed July 1, 2021. And in August, a month later, I did another video on the remote notarization law because there were some key differences between what Governor Ivey allowed and what the law now is. So you might be wondering, why am I doing a video again? Well, when I did a close read of the law, I noticed some subtle differences between what showed up in the bill and what got signed off on. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to give you an overview of what the new law looks like today. And I hope you find this information helpful. If you don't know already, my name is Michelle Riley. I'm the founder of Notaries for Alabama, which has been around, I want to say, since 2012. I've been a commissioned notary here in Alabama since 2005. I'm fortunate enough to have been named one of the National Notary Association's notary ambassadors. I represent the great state of Alabama. I wear a lot of hats, but the hat I'm most pleased with and passionate about is the hat as founder of Notaries for Alabama. We offer training to new notaries, new and existing notaries here in the state. We do that by helping them become commissioned, sorting through those requirements, providing them, once they are commissioned, providing them with supplies. All notaries need a surety bond, and so we make it easy for them to obtain that. And then if they are in the need of errors and omission insurance, other professional liability insurance, we provide that as well. And so now, without further ado, I have just a few slides to share with you as we take a closer look at Alabama's new remote notarization law. And so the objectives are just few. One, to review the key components of the law, give you a better idea of how the remote notarization will take place. I want you to get a feeling for what it would look like if you were asked to perform a notarization remotely. And then I want to spend a little time identifying obstacles, challenges, or you can call them gray areas in the law, the way it currently reads. But first, I think it's really important to clarify the difference between remote online notarization and remote ink signed notarization. Most states have approved remote online notarization for their notaries. The acronym for that is RON, R-O-N. In states that have approved RON, the notaries, most of them, are required to file for or apply for a separate notary commission. It's an additional appointment. So they have traditional notaries, and then they have RON notaries. And some notaries do both. The second requirement is an electronic notary seal. And so the old school embosser and the ink stamp are not necessary at all, and can't be used with true remote notarizations. Both the notary and the signer are required to use an electronic signature. There are no pins involved with a true remote online notarization. RON notaries are required to sign up with a platform or use a platform. This is software that provides the ability to meet with the signer, to use the electronic seal and put it on the document, to use the e-signature, and also to go through a identification process, which is usually KBA, knowledge-based authentication, and or CA, which is credential analysis. And so again, in RON states, typically, if I were in Texas, for an example, I would need to choose a platform that complies with Texas state's requirements and sign up with them, which means a fee. I would have to pay a sign-up fee or a monthly fee to have access to that software program to conduct notarizations. And then RON notaries use an electronic journal. So that's RON, but guess what? That's not what we have here in Alabama. So this is why I thought it was important to make this distinction. In Alabama, we have what is known in the notary industry as remote ink signed notarization. It's still remote notarization, but the pen is still necessary. All signatures performed remotely in Alabama need to be wet signatures. And so if you were going down another path, I'm bringing you back on to the right path. So again, today, by the way, the acronym for remote ink signed notarization is RIN, R-I-N. So if you see that in print or on social media, Facebook groups, there's RON and there's RIN. Alabama has not yet approved RON for its notaries. So again, the law that did get approved for us went into effect July 1, 2020, July 1, 2020. After doing a close read of the remote notarization law, I found that it clearly covers or outlines the following. Wet signatures are required, as I stated. The notary must be in Alabama when conducting the remote notarization. The way signers get identified is very different from traditional notarizations. For a remote notarization, the notary has a choice. He or she can use personal knowledge. So if I personally know someone, I don't need to request any additional identification documents. But if I don't know that person, I am required to obtain and verify 2 forms of valid government issue ID from the signer. So the signer, the customer, the client, the person whose signature I, the notary, need to notarize. he or she must show me 2 forms of government issue ID. At least one of those ID cards has to have a picture, a photograph of the signer, and a sample signature. But wait, that's not all. In addition to 2 forms of ID, I, the notary, must use a process by which the identity of the signer is verified through a review of public or private data sources. We'll talk more about that shortly. The remote notarization law also includes, it states that an audio and video recording of the notarization must be made, and in that recording, the following must be viewed or demonstrated: the date and time of the notarial act, a description of the documents that need to be notarized, the notary's location, a description of how signer's identity was verified, a clear image of the ID that was used. And when I hear that, I imagine, it's funny, I took everything out, get it ready to show you. Here we go. I imagine a clear image of the ID would mean that the signer would hold up their government issue ID to the camera and hold it. And a clear image of the notary watching signatures being made on the document. So positioning the camera so that, well, the signer positioning the camera on their end so that the notary can observe that they are signing their name and that the document was not signed prior to coming on camera. And the law also clearly states that the recording of that notarization must be maintained by the notary for at least 7 years. The law also clearly states that the official notarization date and time is when the notary witnessed the signature online. You might be like, well, why wouldn't it be? When we get a little further in this presentation, you'll see why that's very important. I'll state it now. Keep in mind the signer is in one location, the notary is another location. That document that has now been signed needs to travel to the notary. And so if I'm notarizing your signature in Mobile, Alabama, and I'm in Madison County, Alabama, you've got to get that document to me, and rather than getting in your car and driving the 6 hours, it would make more sense for you to put that in the overnight mail, and then I would get it the next business day. And so again, in filling out the notarial certificate, this is letting me know I can backdate it to the date that I witnessed the signature being made. The law also states quite clearly that notaries are not allowed to use remote notarization for absentee ballot applications, nor for absentee ballot affidavits. So those 2 documents must be notarized in the traditional way, which is the signer, in this case, the voter, appearing in person with the notary. The law also clearly states that a notary who intentionally or fraudulently violates this section of the notary law shall be guilty of a Class C misdemeanor. And then finally, all remote notarizations conducted prior to July 1, 2021 under the Emergency Management Act have been ratified. I'm really glad they thought to put that in. Again, I did quite a few notarizations once Governor Ivey issued that proclamation. And while there were some differences, this reassures everyone that those notarizations are still valid, which I think is really good. All right, I just covered what the law clearly states. But what's missing? That's what I want us to talk about next. The law is silent, in my opinion. And I'm not an attorney. Don't take this to be legal advice or a legal opinion. But I find that the law is silent about where the signer can be located during the notarization. Granted, I do think we can assume it's fine for the signer to be located anywhere in the state of Alabama, because for traditional notarizations, I can get in my car and drive anywhere in Alabama to notarize, and I am within the jurisdiction. That notarization will be valid, regardless of the fact that I live in Madison County. And so we know that Alabama residents who are in Alabama, if they need their signature notarized, a remote notarization is an option. What we don't know is whether or not the new remote law will allow me, the notary, to notarize for someone, whether they're an Alabama resident or a California resident. But if someone is in California, Illinois, New York, Florida, Mississippi, am I able to notarize their signature? I do think it's odd that that did not get addressed in the law. You know, why not say it if that's the intent of the law? But it wasn't addressed. The law is also silent about the notary fee. Now, for traditional notarizations, we know that we charge $5 per notarial act. But this remote notarization is not traditional, not at all. And in most states, I want to say all, but I want to leave a room for those one or two states who might be doing something different. Most states allow remote notaries to charge a remote notarization fee. And in most states, some states say what that additional fee is, the amount, and some states leave it up to the notary, the remote notary's discretion. So in our law, it's not mentioned or even hinted at. There's no mention of a notary log or journal. Now, you might be thinking, well, Michelle, the current traditional law does not require a journal, and you're right. However, Governor Ivey's proclamation was real clear about remote notarizations, and that it required us to keep a record of the remote notarizations that we conduct. So why not now? And then in other states, there is a different type of notarial certificate that is used, so that when somebody, let's say a member of the general public, presents a remotely notarized form, the person on the receiving end is aware of that. So there is language in the notarial certificate that states, hey, this was notarized remotely. Why might that be helpful? That lets the person on the receiving end of the document know that, hey, there's a video of a recording of this transaction with the notary. And in disputes or conflicts, seems to me that would be very helpful. And then finally, what the law is silent about is a clear explanation of what review of public or private data sources is. I think that it's KBA, knowledge-based authentication, or CA, credential analysis, but it may not be. It may be something else. But if this is what we notaries must use in addition to 2 forms of government issue ID, we need to know that. So again, I talked about the signer's location. I talked about the fee, the notary fee. Keep in mind that notaries performing this type of notarization are now going to need to invest in some software that will allow for the audio and visual recording. Some notarizations take longer than 30 or 40 minutes. So the free version of Zoom may not be enough. There might be a need for more than just 2 people to be on the in the video conference. And so a paid version of these products, video conference products, may be necessary. Remember, the notary must store these recordings for at least 7 years. So the notary needs to figure that out, and there could be a cost associated with that. If we find that a notary can notarize for individuals located in other states, I would recommend that they invest in an ID checking guide that allows the notary to be able to verify what an Ohio driver's license or state ID looks like. We talked about the journal already, and we talked about the notary certificate. So these are the things that the law is silent about. And so these are some of the questions that the Alabama Remote Notary Advisory Group has been tackling. We meet at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, in order to help us gain a better understanding of Alabama's remote notary law. The purpose of that group, again, is to educate notaries and stakeholders. Stakeholders can be paralegals, legal assistants, lawyers. Stakeholders can be the probate office, the Secretary of State's office. And so this group was formed to take a look at the new law and develop some best practices so that notaries throughout the state are providing the best service and notarization to the community. And you see the names on the screen of our current members of the advisory group. If you have any interest in joining us, these are working meetings. We're not just discussing. So I'm putting out the call. If you are a stakeholder and you are committed to roll up your sleeves and do some work, please contact me. We could use the help. And in particular, I would love if we could get representation from the court reporters here in Alabama, the paralegals, the legal assistants, and at least 1 or 2 representatives from the different county probate offices. All right, I thought it would be helpful for us to just go through what a remote notarization could look like here in Alabama. Under step 1, I have that the notary would explain the remote requirements to the signer ahead of time, make sure the signer has a camera and knows what to expect. If there is an additional fee, get all of that cleared up front. Then the notary would send the signer a link to join the video conference. The signer and the notary would meet online. And then, of course, the notary would press record to record the transaction. Under step 2, this is when the signer would present not one, but 2 forms of government issue ID for the notary to view. And again, still working out the process to verify public and private information. But at that point, the notary would need to complete that step. And the notary would recite the mandatory information. Remember earlier, I said the law clearly states what must take place in that video conference. And so what that suggests to me is that notaries will need to be provided with a script so that there is consistency and accuracy in every notarization. Under step 3, the signer presents to the notary the unsigned document. And so for that, I imagine the signer would be asked to show the document up to the camera so that at least the title is visible and the signature line so that the notary can clearly see this form has not been signed yet. And then when it is time for the signer to sign their name, that the signer will adjust his camera so that the notary can witness the actual signature being made. There will be documents that require an oath or an affirmation to be administered by the notary. And so the notary will make sure that that gets completed as well as part of the notarization process. Under step 4, the signer would then, after the video conference, notary presses stop. And now they talk about the best way for the signer to get that signed document to the notary. Obviously, if they're in the same city, perhaps then they can drive it over, who knows, or meet up somewhere. But going back to that example, me in Madison County, the signer in Mobile County, the best way, in my opinion, would be for the signer to put that in the mail and send it to me in Madison County. When it arrives, the notary needs to verify that the document that comes out of that envelope matches the document that I witnessed during the video conference. And then the notary would complete the notarial certificate, fill out the venue where the notary's feet were planted during the notarization, the signer's name, and then I go ahead and add my signature as I normally would, and then my emboss seal or the ink seal. Keep in mind, the law clearly stated that when I sign my name on that notarial certificate as a notary, that notarization date must match the date that I witnessed the signature during the video conference. And I'm going to choose, this is my take on the remote notarization. I am going to record the transaction in my journal. So again, I know Alabama law does not require me to keep a journal for traditional notarizations, but I do. And so I'm going to definitely record the remote notarizations as well. The signer for remote notarizations. I'm not going to require them to sign my journal, but I will fill out all of the information except for the signature. And on the signature line, I'm going to put that this was a remote notarization. And then there's got to be a way for me to collect my payment. I need to collect the notary fee and possibly a remote fee. And then I will return the document, the notarized document, to the signer. And I should have stressed this sooner, so I'm going to mention it now. It's going to be imperative that the signer be advised of what the notary fee as well as the remote fee, if one is charged, prior to step one. Okay, or that's going to be part of step one, to make sure that that is clearly indicated and the signer not only is aware of it, but accepts that and is okay with that. After I return the notarized document to the signer, I'm going to save that recording for at least 7 years. That completes the workflow, and I hope you found it helpful. Hopefully it gave you a visual or better idea of how remote notarizations may be conducted here in Alabama. So next steps, I want to encourage you to give some thought to the following. Is remote notarization the right choice for you? Something tells me for some of you, what I just described is very different from what you thought it was going to be. Yes, remote notarizations in Alabama ain't the same as remote notarization in most states. There's a lot to it, and you need to decide if it makes sense for you. How will you satisfy that ID requirement? You know what I'm talking about. It's easy to ask for 2 forms of ID, but many times a resident may not have 2 forms of ID. According to what I see, unless you personally know them, you're not going to be able to move on to the next. You can't notarize it. And then how are you going to satisfy that piece about a process where the notary verifies public and private data? Ask yourself if you think the law should be amended. Professionally and personally, I think it should. And I've already reached out to my elected officials and asked them if they would please remove that requirement. Or instead of saying 2 forms of ID, at least go down to 1 form of ID. And if I didn't stress it enough earlier, I feel that this can be an unnecessary hardship on the elderly, on younger people, on many Alabama residents who only have 1 form of government issue ID, a driver's license, a state ID. I've run into problems now with traditional notarizations with individuals who don't have anything to hide. They're not up to no good. They just didn't renew their ID or can't find their ID. And then remember, you need to figure out which video conference software is right for you. And then how are you going to handle documents that require multiple signers and or witnesses? To coordinate that whole process, it needs to be simultaneous. I believe that is a word in the law, that it is a simultaneous video recording. And again, you need to decide, are you going to charge extra for this type of notarization? And if so, how much and how to collect? Because keep in mind, most for traditional notarizations, we notaries charge a fee, we collect it usually in the form of cash or credit or debit card. And so when you're doing this remotely, your options are going to be different. Normally, if I was speaking to a group, this is where I would ask if there were any questions. I can't do that, but if you do have questions, you can type them below and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope you found this information helpful. We've just scratched the surface. I don't have all the answers, but remember, again, if you are interested in being part of the Alabama Remote Notary Advisory Group, please reach out to me. You can do that by email at michelle@notariesforalabama.com, or you can go to alabamaremotenotary.com and fill out the contact sheet. You can also do that on notariesforalabama.com. Again, I wish you all the best. If you have not only questions, but suggestions and how we can provide this important service to especially the residents here in Alabama, please reach out to me. Thanks again for your time. Have a wonderful day.